Another edition here of Getting There with Gaz, and a different edition today. Usually we talk about careers, businesses, sports heavy talk. This is one of the episodes when I launched this podcast that I was most looking forward to. And I have
Let's
to
go,
admit,
baby.
yes, that's right. You hear that voice right there. That is one of the voices that, if you're listening on the audio side, that I had the most requests for. When
Whoa, really? You didn't tell
yes,
me this.
yes, when are you and Josh Murray going to talk again? So, for those who are not
I
familiar,
just can't believe is this a mirage? Is this the Tom Diklowski?
that's right.
Honestly, I don't. You could call me out if this is a lie, but I don't believe we've talked in person or on the phone since you left the score. Obviously, we've kept in contact over text and how it is with social media nowadays, but I think this is the first time I've seen your face in 6 years. Is
Six
that
years. That's
is
right.
that accurate? I don't
Yeah,
think maybe
I-
like Clinton Street Pub or something on like a Saturday night, but other than
when
that,
this is going to air, by the way, I have a monster beard. It was cleaned up for another broadcast, but I have this huge beard. Josh
yeah,
looks like
you
a
do.
professional. Like, yes,
I
we have
just got
not
the
seen
baby
each
face.
other.
I don't have to do anything. I'm always ready. I'm always camera ready with the baby face.
For the first time in 6 years in a public forum, we are reconnected. Like you said, we still stayed in touch after all this time at the score 1260. Usually just DMs on Twitter constantly.
Right.
That's how we've talked for over 6 years. So if you enjoyed the first quarter, yes, we remained friends in the most bizarre way possible. Now, we're both not in Syracuse. One
Mm-mm.
of us, we're technically both not in radio anymore. So we will cover
No.
all of those things of what has happened in our careers. But before we get to the history of the first quarter, this part one of the episode is titled Gaz Gets His Dream Job. Now, Syracuse people who are listening are sports fans. That's not a shot at Doug Marrone, who said Syracuse football was
Yeah.
his dream job and then left. I know the correlation, especially with a Syracuse themed episode, how that feels, but that's not the case. If you've listened to past episodes of Getting There with Gaz, we talk about people's careers and where they landed, but I really haven't talked about how I got to where I was with this job here in Syracuse. So I got to go all the way back. And Josh is going to be hanging out as you heard in previous episodes. I'm going to bounce some questions off of him or some comments, and he can fill in as we go. But I
Back
don't
to
think
my
you,
producer role.
that's right. I don't think you remember a 10-year-old guys and where this whole started. So I go back to 1999. That's how we're going back here, talking about this dream job I land. So 1999, I'm about 9, 10 years old through this time. And this is the moment I want to become a sports broadcaster. This is when I find out. And how the story goes is that I played Pop Warner football in Syracuse for the Geddes Westville Knights. And when I would go to practice, my dad was my head coach. So my dad and I would ride in the car to practice. So when we were driving, we would have WHEN 620 AM, which was the sports station in Syracuse in the late 90s. And if you lived in Central New York, you know that was the home of the Chiefs, that was home of the Bills, that was home of the Crunch. All the stuff was on that station in the late 90s. Now, when I would drive to practice, I'm a huge football fan. And my dad and I were talking about the Syracuse football team. Now, this is a weird transition period. We're a little bit past McNabb in 1999, so we're kind of seeing the transition here in the program. Still good, still competing in the Big East. But my dad and I, because I loved football and I was a young kid, I would talk football with my dad in the car. And then he would put WHEN on. And I heard this voice, and it was almost as if, because I was still a kid, I couldn't even understand it. I'm like, how is this person in this thing talking about what my dad and I are talking about right now? It blew my mind. I'm like, Dad, who is this? And he said, this is Adam Shine. And I said, do I know him? As if we were buddies. He's like, no. I'm like, wait, is this his job? And he said, yes. I was like, wait, does he get paid to do what we're doing right now? And he said, yeah, that's his job. He's a sports broadcaster, a sports radio host. And I knew right then and there, I'm like, wait a second. There are people who get paid to talk about Syracuse sports, like I talk about with my friends and go to games with my dad and my family. That is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And that was the moment. WHEN, listening to Adam Shine, prime time Adam Shine. He was the man. Now, here's the thing. And some people ask me this question all the time. They go, guys, who is the number one person you want to interview? To this day, it is still Adam Shine. So if you listen to this podcast
Oh wow.
and right, if you listen to this podcast and maybe you don't get an opportunity to partner with us, or maybe you're not a social media person, or maybe you are. Like, if you want to contribute any way to this podcast, here's your chance. At Adam Shine on Twitter. Adam SCHEIN. Tweet him and say, "Guys loves you. Come on his podcast." There's my claim. There's the dream, to talk to my guy Adam Shine. I remember all this stuff. I'm talking Gimme a Nugget, talking about De Leon on the radio. I know all the stuff with Adam Shine. I followed his career. So primetime Adam Shine is the reason I wanted to do this. Now, here's what I didn't realize when I was 9 or 10 years old. This is my idol. Like, this is the guy who I want to grow up to be one day, listening to him on the radio. What I don't realize is that Adam is 22. Adam is fresh out of college. He is fresh out of Newhouse. Now, I'm not registering that because I don't know. And I like to say he was that good that I couldn't realize he was a college kid. But maybe one day when we have Adam on, or maybe one day when we have a mutual colleague of ours, the man-child Jim Lurch. Jim Lurch is the then brand manager, program director, who hired Adam out of college. The story goes, I don't want to ruin the story. Allegedly, he heard him on WAER, which is the college radio station in central New York, said, "Who's the Long Island kid talking lacrosse? I want him." And hired him listening to the college radio station. Man-child, we're going to cover him a lot later, but Josh, you know Man-child, he has an unbelievable ear and an unbelievable knowledge for the sports radio thing, because you not only worked with him in a professional manner, he was also your professor.
Yeah, so that's pretty much where I got my start too, was just kind of asking him for a shot. And then I remember the first gig that I ever had. I know that you talked about listening to Adam Shine and kind of being blown away. I remember the first thing that I did was I had to cover Syracuse Chief games. I had to sit in the studio. I had to, go to commercial, whatever. And the two guys in broadcasting with Jason Benetti and Kevin Brown. So that was my first thing where I'm like, these guys are doing Syracuse Chief games. They're the best two broadcasters I've ever heard. Like, what? I just wanted to quit on the spot. I mean, it was just insane. I'm like, this is, and it also like, I know we'll get into, the industry and everything, but it also goes to show you how much you have to grind. And just because that you're really good, you have to just, do it year after year and get better and make connections. That was the first thing I was blown away by. And then back to Lurch, I mean, he just knows so many people, and he was able to get so many guests on when I would produce his show. And it's just like, you're right, he has an ear for talent, where it's either messing around with Bud Poliquin on his show, or having Benetti on, or reaching out to Adam Shine, giving him his start. It's just funny how different people are able just to like have that little, whatever it is. Yeah, I know that was kind of a long answer to your question. I kind of just ranted there, but
no, it was good. Here's the thing. We're taping this in February of 2021. There is a chance that when you're listening to this, I had planned on doing a history of Bud and the Man-child, where I talked to Man-child and Bud. So there's a chance when you're listening to this, you just scroll down a few episodes and you can listen to their career. So hopefully, maybe you're listening in February, don't see it yet, but in a few months, you will get to see that opportunity to listen to those guys' career and everything else. So that's the thing. Like, and by the way, Adam Shine, someone said, "Guys, why didn't you talk to him? Why didn't you reach out to him? Why didn't you connect?" I was kind of nervous, but I have had two interactions with him. I've had two interactions with Adam Shine. One was in Houston in 2017. He's doing his show, I believe, for CBS Sports Network, Time to Shine, and he's up on his stage, and I'm wearing a Pearl Washington shirt. And Adam's like just looking around, and I just went like this, and he's like, gave me a point. And on Twitter, he's like, I was like, "Hey, shout out to Adam Shine for giving me some love for the Pearl Washington shirt." He goes, "That was awesome." And then 3 years later, Jason Barrett, who runs Barrett Sports Media, had an interview with Adam, and Adam talked about his career. And I tweeted out and said, "Hey, Adam Shine's one of my influences in my career. I'm so glad I got to learn more about his career." And he tweeted back to me and wrote, "Thanks, guys. Keep up all the great work you're doing. Great in your career." And I almost fell out of my chair like a little teenager from a boy band, like Bieber had just come over. Ah! Adam Shine tweeted me. So that's my dude, Adam Shine. Hopefully one day he'll be on this podcast. SCHEIN. Prime time, Adam Shine. So,
well, the question is not if you're gonna have him on. The question is what happens after you have him on. That's like, it's like you chase. It's like a fighter chasing a world championship. When you get what are you gonna do after you have him on?
I have no idea. I don't know what he's going to have to do after I have him. Maybe he'll have to get a restraining order against me. I'm just kidding. No, I don't know. Hopefully, I'll learn a lot of stuff from
Careful.
that interview. I know, exactly. No, he's the man. Shout out to Primetime Man Shine. In all seriousness, he was a huge influence on me. So
Great.
there's a part about college here coming up. So what happens in my college path and what goes on with sports radio and broadcasting and why I decided to go a little bit away from play-by-play to sports talk radio. For those who are doing that, I would pause this episode if you're a chronological order person. So we're about like the 10:30 mark right now in this episode. So I paused the episode because this is where the college stuff would come in. So college, what happens with guys and all that in a future episode, there's your chronological order. So let's fast forward, though, to when I'm in college and when I'm home from break. So not so much the career stuff, all that stuff. I want to talk about when I'm back in Q's because this is when the spark continues. So when I'm in college, I'm fortunate enough to get the opportunity to play college football. And in the summers, I have a schedule set up. So here's what I do. I work for the town of Geddes Parks and Recreation. So a sweet summer gig where I'm basically at the park, hanging out with kids or, playing kickball, dodgeball, going on field trips. And then I would work out. So I'd do my job. I'd hit the gym because I was playing college football. And then I'd go home to my parents and I'd chill. And, you're doing a college football workout. You got to just chill and relax a little bit. So what I would do is I would go in my parents' basement after I showered and I'd put on NCAA football 14. I'd put on, I don't even know, it wasn't even 14 at this point. This has got to be like NCAA football 11. It's got to be some random edition of the college football game. But I had two TVs in my basement. So the far right TV, I'd be playing college football or Madden, whatever it was, probably it's college football, but I'd have it on mute. And on the other TV, I would have Time Warner Cable on. And at this point, they were simulcasting On the Block with Brent Axe. Now, Brent Axe, at this point when we're taping, is still a radio host in Syracuse. He'd been there forever. He, I believe, also did WHEN 620, then was let go, then joined the Score 1260, and now works for ESPN Syracuse, which is owned by Galaxy. So he's hit a different stops there. But what I would do is I wanted to be a sports radio host, and I wanted to host in Syracuse. I wanted to host in my home market. The only two places I ever wanted to work was my home market in Syracuse, talking about my favorite team, the Syracuse Orange, or work in Bristol. Because I was still fighting, and as you heard in that college episode, I was still trying to figure out if I wanted to be a play-by-play guy, if I wanted to be a television anchor, what I actually wanted to do. But I knew eventually it's radio, it's Adam Shine, it's Bud and the Man-Child, it's Brent Axe, all the shows I grew up listening to. I know I can do this, and I'm finding out I can do this really well. So here's what I'd do. I'd watch Axe's show, and I'd listen. I'd listen how he'd set up segments. I'd listen how he'd bring on guests. I'd listen to that every single day. Now, when I'm in Geneva, I can't hear his show because I had football practice. I'm at school. But every time I'd come home from the summer, I would listen to the show. And Axe, if he ever hears this, he's like, "You're probably the only one who ever watched on TV." Like I'm watching a dude. And remember, this is 2011. So in 2021, 10 years later, that's a pretty normal thing to hear a sports talk radio show on television, but it wasn't very normal. I know Mike and the Mad Dog did some stuff on the Yes Network, but it wasn't a very norm thing back then. So here I am, I'm hearing stuff about Mikey K from the beginning too, giving his picks out on the NFL. I'm hearing about Trash Tuesday, which is a themed segment. Damon Amendola, who we will get to later on in this episode. Damon Amendola, I still remember this. I would wonder, why does Axe Weekly have this Boston guy on? What is this bot? And Josh, you'll know this. DA is not a Boston guy. He's a Cuse guy through and through. And I don't want you to tell the story yet, but he will come back, and I think you're a fan of him as I am a fan of DA.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll get into it later, but keep going.
Yeah. So I'm watching Axe's show, and I'm trying to figure out what my next step is. So I graduate college in May of 2012. Now, unfortunately, I can't get a radio gig out of the gates. Gaz gets a radio job. Let's pause there. So 2 quick pauses. Again, if you want chronological order stuff, second pause early in this episode. Find out how I get a radio job here. We're at the 14-minute mark. So there you go. So now we reset. It's December 2012, and Axe leaves the Score 1260. Now he goes on, he takes a job with Syracuse.com. I can't tell you what the name of it, but he still works for Syracuse.com when we're taping. So Axe leaves the Score, and they don't know what they're going to do in the afternoons yet. But quickly they make a decision. They are going to go with Mike Lindsley, who's hosting middays, quickly to the afternoons. Now, I eventually do work with Mike, but here's how sick I start to get, like in my mind. And maybe people hearing this is just like a passion for your business. But again, even though Axe is done, I'm still doing the same thing. And my buddies are going to be listening, like, guys, there is no way you worked out this much. I'm telling you guys, like, post college, I go back to the gym. I'll even say the name of the gym, even though they're not a sponsor. I go to Aspen Gym, which is like on the west side of Syracuse. And was it Aspen? It might have been Pine Grove or something. You know what? I don't remember the name of the gyms. There you go. I won't give you free ads. Somewhere in the west side of
Pine
Syracuse.
Grove. Pine Grove is like a middle school in ESL.
Dude, there's like a gym named like Pine something in the west side of Syracuse. Anyways, see,
Who knows where you went?
Josh does not believe I was working out this much after college. But so
Might have been a
Lindsley
strip club, honestly.
So Lindsley is now hosting in January of 2013. But I'm still determined to find a way to get into this building. My resume is sitting on their desk. I know the day comes eventually I will be ready to go. And if they ever step me in and like take a role on, I will be prepared. So I'm telling you, dude, I would listen to that show with Mike Lindsay and a guy named Alex Plavin every day at the gym. I actually would force my schedule that I would go. I was working for a place in Watertown. I would come back, go to the gym, put the headphones on, and I would listen to their show. And dude, I'm telling you, I would get so frustrated because I'd be like, if I was on the air, I would do this. Plavin asked a dumb question. I'm like, I would have asked this. Mike said that. And again, months later, I decided to start tweeting into the show and kind of build a little connection with Mike. But it was one of those things. And I'm sure if people have a passion for the job that they have, they look at what someone's doing and they just get so jealous. And that's honestly it. Like, I wish I could tell you it was anything else but jealousy, but it was like, I know if I get this opportunity, here's how I would do it. Maybe an assistant coach who watches the head coach and says, the moment you let me run my team, like I can do this when I get out there. I know this mistakes. I know the changes I would make. And some of the stuff was good. But I was just so determined. I was like driving myself insane, listening to their show every single day, waiting for the moment to happen that they would eventually say, okay, like hopefully they're going to hire me. And again, I'm waiting. So Mike leaves in March of 2013. So Mike got pushed to the afternoon drive, December, January. I think it was January. Now I think back. And he's gone in 3 months. And he goes to 1045 The Team in Albany, which is eventually years later where I end up. So Mike's gone, Axe is gone. So the Score 1260 is not exactly sure what they're going to do in the afternoons. So what they decide to do is they put Alex Plavin in the afternoon drive. Now, Alex, the kid who some people in Syracuse may remember, some kids may not. Kind of a guy who's had, he could do it. Like he was skilled, but Axe had been in the market a lot longer. Mike had an element of both knowing stuff and having a sales element to this, and we'll get to that a little later. But Plavin was a guy who they gave it a shot. Maybe one day I'll ask what happened, but he didn't last too long. And eventually there was no local programming on the Score 1260 except Bud and the Man-Child. So I believe it's like May or June that Plavin was eventually, that show was done. And from then, so like June of 2013, I felt like a while. That's it. Just Bud and the Man-Child, 10 to noon, no other local programming. So here I am. I get hired, as you heard in the Gaz gets his first radio job. I get hired in September, and I work my way through. So if you're looking for the reset of the story, here is June 2014. And I left a little cliffhanger on the Gaz gets his first radio job for a little cliffhanger here. And Josh, I don't know how much of this stuff you actually know about the build to our show the first quarter. Did I ever tell you?
I'm actually like I know that if somebody's watching, I've just been staring at the screen. I can still hear you and everything. It's honestly very interesting. I don't think we've ever had a conversation about this.
Now I feel bad because now
the journey like towards this.
Yeah, now I feel bad because Josh and I worked together for about a year and a half, and I've never told him any of this stuff, but I'm doing it in front of an audience. So Josh is enjoying it like everybody else. So okay.
I got front row seats, basically.
That's right. Yeah, so it's June of 2014. So I think you graduated at this point. You're not technically at the score yet, but you're getting close. I mentioned in a previous episode, for those who don't remember, I'm the producer at this point for Bud and the Man-Child and In the Cell with ML Mike Lindsley's show. And it was between me and somebody else to be the producer for Bud and the Man-Child. That other person was you. Do you remember that? That it was between you and
No,
I? Yes.
I do not remember that at all. Honestly, at that point, you would have definitely beat me out. I was like this college kid coming out with no confidence and just like I don't know what's going on. I don't know how to do anything.
So
Um,
that story I shared on a previous episode, basically what happens is I think you graduated Oswego in May of 2014, if my timeline's right.
correct. That's
So
right. Yeah.
what happened was I talked to Manchild and said, like, I want to be your producer after Jimmer Morgan, who was a Syracuse guy. He left. So
Bishop
that whole
Grimes guy as well.
yeah.
Go ahead.
So that whole Adam Shine spiel you just heard, and it's all true, and like that's why I wanted to do this. I basically told Manchild that, and I knew the whole history. And he came back and said, "All right, I think we're gonna have Gaz as the producer, but you are the person." He goes, "It's between you and somebody else." I come to find out it was you. So yeah, that's a story. I don't think if you ever knew that. Like, sorry, I took your job out of college because I
Yeah, you
talked.
buried me. You
No,
buried me.
no,
Buried
I
me
did
in the
not.
dirt. Buried me in
So
the dirt.
so Josh is not employed yet, but basically what happens in June of 2014 is our market president, who again, if you remember previous episodes, he's somebody who runs everything. He runs both sales and on-air radio station. His name is Shane Bogardus at this point. Shane sends out an email to everybody working locally there in the Syracuse radio station and says, "Hey, it's halfway through the year. I'd love to find out more about your goals here this year. Love to meet with you. Come on down." Now, again, it's to everybody in sales, everybody on air, mostly full time people, but because it's an all staff email, I'm part time at this point. I get the email as well. And I believe he said, "Hey, make an appointment with Rebecca, who is the secretary up front at Cumulus Meeting, who might still be there." Shout out to her. She was an awesome person. I'm not sure if she's still
Wow.
there, but so she said, "Make an appointment with Rebecca." So here I am part time. And I know Shane because I'm working promotions at this point. So when Shane would come to the events, I'd always introduce myself, talk to him. I was very social at these events, getting to know everybody. So Shane was very aware of who I was. So I said, "Hey, Rebecca, I want to make an appointment with Shane." I believe Rebecca gave me a look like, "Okay, like you're part time. That email wasn't meant for you. But you know what? Sure. You can meet with Shane if you want." It's very rare, and this is not a shot at market presidents, and maybe every market's different. Look, the guy runs the entire sales team and the on-air team. He's got a lot on his plate. I don't know how often most market presidents are going to meet with part-time employees. Could be a lot in different markets. This is a rarity that he's going to take this meeting. So I get a meeting with Shane, and Shane sits me down, and now he had a nickname for me. Everyone knows me as Gaz, but Shane always called me Godzilla. So instead of Godzilla, you drop the D. So he'd call me Godzilla. He's like, "Godzilla, what are you doing?" Like, he's all excited because I'm sure every other meeting with the sales team and the on-air team, people are, no offense, complaining about things they want to have changed. And I'm going in there with like, "Oh my God, I'm here. Like, I'm at the corner office. I get to talk to the boss." So he tells me, he's like, "What do you want your plan to be?" And I tell him, I'm like, "Shane, my job here, I would love to have one day my own show. You guys just heard it. Like, I'm born and raised in Syracuse, grew up listening to Adam Shine, WHEN. I'm a huge Syracuse fan. I've been a broadcaster, wanted to be since I was a kid. My goal is to have my own radio show." And he's like, "Look," he's like, "Do you want to do music?" I'm like, "Not really." So you don't want to be on 93Q? You don't want to be on the Rebel? You want to be on X? I'm like, "No, I want to be on the Score 1260. He's like, "Well, Mike's in the afternoons." And at this point, again, Mike's back in the afternoons at this point. Mike's in the afternoons, Bud and the Man-Child's on middays. He's like, "Where would you go? Like, you don't have a time slot." I was like, "I want to do morning drive." And he's like, "Okay." He's like, "Here's the thing." He's like, "I can never have you do that unless you sell for us." He's like, "I don't have it in the budget." He's like, "I just can't put you and give you your own show unless you show me some value and like you can sell for us." Now, at this point in my life, I actually am working in sales. I'm working for a company in Watertown selling Adidas and Under Armour, and I'm doing well. Like, I'm doing okay. I shouldn't say well. I'm doing good enough for a 23-year-old. Let's put it like that. I am not complaining
You're
about living.
making an adult salary.
Yes, exactly right. So he's like, "Look, I can't have you get your own show unless you sell for us." And I'm like, "All right, Shane, well, that's cool. Like, I don't have any interest in selling with you guys, but if something else turns up, let me know." I said, okay, all right, Godzilla, keep up the great work, blah, blah, blah. So 2 months pass. So this is August now. This is August of 2014. So Josh will tell you this. Where the producer room is at Cumulus Media in Syracuse, you're in the hallway.
It's not.
So
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think it's a room. You're like in between three radio stations, which is fine. I mean, like it is what it is. You got. I'm not trying to sound like I'm complaining, but you're in it. Like you are there. You have about 3 feet of space. It seems like in between radio stations with everything that's going on. So it's one of those jobs. I feel like you really have to want it if you want to work there. You know?
yes. And here's what happens next. So I'm in the hallway, as we call it, and Tom Mitchell, again, operations manager, the guy who oversees everything on the air, his office is like north. So if I'm looking this way, he's north. I think it's actually east. All right, it's east of where I'm sitting. So he comes over just randomly. I think I was filling in August. Both Manchild and Mike took off back-to-back weeks. So Mike took off a week in August, and then Manchild took off a week. So I was hosting back-to-back weeks. So when those two fill-ins end, I'm just back to producing. And Tom comes up to me and says, "Hey, I heard you talk to Shane back in June." I said, "Yeah, Shane said I couldn't get my own show unless I sold." He's like, "Shane wants to meet with you again as soon as possible." And I'm like, "Whoa." Like, let's go. I'm like, no way. So sure enough, I go back down to Shane's office and Shane talks to me, he goes, "I got to tell you something. I listened to you, and for being how young you are, you can do this. Like, I thought I was going to listen to just like a regular fill in. You were really good. Like, really good." And I'm like blown away. I'm like, oh my God, like my boss is telling me how great I am. Like, I would just fill it in. Like, he's like, "Here's what we're going to do. I want to give you your own show. I want to put you in the morning drive. I know you've worked your tail off producing." He goes, "I will give you your own show if you join us full time as a member of the sales team." And I'm like, wow. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know what to say. Like, he's like, "You got to interview with me." I'm like, "Shane, can I just like learn a little bit about this before I make this decision? Like, I want to do this. This is my dream job, but like, I'm a little nervous because it's different." He's like, "Okay." He's like, "Totally." He's like, "I totally get what you're saying. Like, you don't have that much experience selling media, but let me take you out on a ride and we'll see how this goes." I said, "Okay." So what happens next is the best advice I've ever gotten, and I didn't realize it. This is the best advice someone has ever given me in my media career, and hopefully somebody listening will take this advice and take what Shane told me. So Shane says we're in a car driving, and Shane's doing just straight up cold calls. Like, Shane and I are just going into places, and he's just trying to work it. Like, he's just showing me how to be a sales guy. So I'm sitting there, and my mind's going a million different places. Like, I got this whole thing, and at this point, also, like, they're gonna have me as the pre and post game show. Mike sells me in where I'm gonna host a pre and post game for Syracuse football. So I'm all excited. I'm like, I'm gonna be the post game show host, but we can't have a pre game because it's not sold. So I'm talking to Shane about how we can sell a pre game show. He's giving me his opinions on that. But I go, "Shane, what's your best advice for someone getting in to radio, to media, like somebody like me? What's the best advice you give somebody?" And that advice he gave me is so important now in my life. Shane goes and he goes, "Here's what I would tell anybody trying to get into media." This is 2014 again. He goes, "When you go to an employer, introduce yourself and say your name is Tom Gazlowski, INC." I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Tell the employer your name is Tom Gazlowski, INC. Anytime you're applying for a media job, you better be INC or LLC." So some people hearing that are probably having the same reaction that I did. I'm like, what the hell is he talking about? But what Shane said makes so much more sense to me now. What Shane was telling me was that you listening right now might have a set of skills. And not to quote Liam Neeson from Taken, you've been inherited with a certain set of skills, but certain people are really good at something. Like, if you're a great barber, that's a skill set. If you're incredible with video production and cutting highlights, and Josh Murray and I have a common friend who is unbelievable at that. Like, if you can cut video, if you can cut hair, if you can paint, if you can construct things, those are skill sets. And with your skill set, you can make money for yourself. What I didn't understand is that understanding the history of Syracuse sports for 25 years, that's a skill. Being able to speak into a microphone, that's a skill. Fantasy football, betting tips, understanding this information, although to sports fans, we don't consider that a skill, that's a skill. And what Shane was trying to tell me and say, hopefully some young broadcasters, who, whether you're making a podcast, whether you're making a YouTube channel, if you're going on your own, especially kids in college, or as I like to say, young broadcasters means someone starting their career. Make yourself an INC. Make yourself an LLC. So when you use your skill set, you benefit for yourself. Now, I'm not telling you don't take a job. If someone offers you a job in media and you can build your resume and get that platform, please do that. But I didn't take Shane's advice. I'm like, Shane, I'm worried about the post-game show. I don't know if you heard me earlier. This LLC, INC nonsense is crazy. But it's the best advice I've ever been given by anybody, because what he told me was that one day you can do this on your own. Like the future 10 years from now is that people who have skill sets can go off and make their own money and show up their skill set. And look where I am now. Like, so I don't know how many people know this. I know the partners of the podcast know this, and people who have sponsored the podcast know this. In honor of Shane, this production is called Godzilla Media LLC. So when you partner with this, you're not paying me directly. You're paying my LLC, which I named Godzilla Media in honor of Shane and that advice. So that's a really cool story. Hopefully people enjoy. And again, if you're listening and you have your own podcast or your YouTube channel and you always ask, like, how can I get sponsors? How can I get people? Make yourself an LLC. The business side of that and everything else, do your research on it. I had to. But Shane, I just want to say, if you get to listen to this any day, I took your advice. 7 years too late, but I took your advice, man. So, yeah, Godzilla Media LLC. The sponsors know that, and soon to be sponsors. There you go. You won't just be Venmoing me cash. It's a legitimate business and everything else. So, Shane's in the car with me, and he says, okay, you have to quit your job in Watertown if you want your dream job. And I said, okay. He goes, we still have to interview you. And you just heard a half hour of why I wanted this job so bad, what it was going to be, how it was going to come together, and everything else. So they said, it's yours. They said, it's your job. You're going to get your dream job. You have to be a part of the sales team. So you're going to sell your own show. Like when people want to advertise in the first quarter, they're going to you. You have to bring in your own sponsors. You have to become your own business. You have to become your own brand, all that stuff. You got to get ready to do this if you want your own show. And I'm like, okay. And think about, put yourself in my shoes here, right? If someone offers you the job you've wanted since you were a kid, and for some perspective here, by the way, if you don't live in the Syracuse area, I think it's important to note this. And this is not to be like a brag or anything. This is just like the history of the market. This had never happened before. Like this wasn't like there was a morning show 5 years previous or 10 years previous. We can ask Manchild this going back to WHN, but a local morning show in the Syracuse area had never been a thing. If I'm wrong on that, Tom Gaz on Twitter, Facebook, my memory, I don't remember there ever being a local morning show in the history of Central New York for sports. So we're going to uncharted territory. And I know we hate hearing that word after 2020, but I signed the papers. And my show is going to launch in September. I tell Manchild, I tell Lindsley that I'm going to move on from being the producer. Now, it's a weird conversation for both of them, although they're very happy for me. It's weird having somebody who just worked on your show now competing against you, which is, by competing against them, I mean like for guests and things and, topics and everything else. Josh, if I remember this correctly, you then become the producer of Bud and the Manchild. Tim Forbes becomes the manager. So
the producer. Yeah.
And then there was a little battle because in early September, they tried telling me I wasn't going to have a producer. And I had to go to Shane and tell him, like, look, I need a producer, blah, blah, blah. And I want Josh as the producer. Like I told him, I'm like, Josh Murray's my pick. Yes, because we got to know each other a little bit through Bud and the Manchild. And like, I believe like that 3-month period, you kind of would just like, you and I would produce the show together, I think, right? From May to August.
Yeah, and you would fill in for Bud sometimes. So I would fill in as a producer, so I would get to know you. And then it's funny hearing all this because I didn't know this. And then it's like you did the reverse Game of Thrones to me. Like at first, when I got out of college, you stabbed me in the back for the producer role, and then you felt bad about it. And then you gave it back when you got your primetime
Wait a
show in the
second.
morning.
I would not say I stabbed you in the back. I didn't even know you. I just said I wanted the job more than you. I legit did not know your name until 2
No,
weeks later.
you deserved it way more than me. That's for sure.
So
But
we get ready. September 15th is the scheduled launch date. Now, one thing before we get to this year, the first quarter and like the first show and like what happens, like you've heard the story, like I did it. Like I'm going to get my own show. My buddies back home would always been saying, Gaz needs his own show. Like I appreciate the support. The one thing I was really ticked off about before the show was that if you have a new show launching, you got to let people know. So I don't know why I was so hung up on this, but I would constantly go to Tom Mitchell and be like, hey, are you going to put out a press release that my show's launching? He's like, yeah, we'll put one out. I'm like, and like it wouldn't come out the next day. Tom, I need a press release. Like I gotta let people know the show's coming. Like it's gonna hurt me if no one knows the show's coming. I have to sell the show. He's like, all right, we'll get one. We'll get one. Radio term promos. I don't even remember, Josh, and maybe you do. Do you remember us running promos promoting my show launching? I don't think
launching, no, I don't remember that.
so. Yeah, like
Yeah.
we're a week out from the show. No, I get it. Like Manchild and Lindsley both would have helped. Like if a new show's launching, it's good for the station. It's good for everybody. I don't honestly remember us even promoting the show on the air. If that's wrong, please. If someone remembers the show, I know I don't even think I even promoted it on Facebook or Twitter until like a week before because I didn't know what to do. Like I didn't want to overstep
Yeah.
my like bosses and be like, hey, if they're not going to promote it, I'm not going to. Like I need clearance here. I want to make sure if they're going to do it, I'll do it with them, like a partnership. So it took so long, and someone can Google this. I believe the show launches Monday, September 15th, 2014, and the press release was released on Sunday. So like the day
Nice.
before the show launches. And I'm telling you, I feel
But
like that
does that,
day.
sorry to cut you off. I
No,
don't know
you're
if you
good.
want to have a banter about this, or do you want me to like let you go and then kind of we'll talk at the end about it?
About the press release or about the show
Or
in
just
general?
about in general, like that, like this type of thing specifically. Like to me, at least it was different things, but it was a little humbling of like, because I don't know, when you grow up, like you said, just like idolizing sports and idolizing these sportscasters, you just think that everyone kind of has that mindset. And it was kind of eye opening also to be like, oh, not everyone, but it was kind of like it was almost like a niche thing at the station where it was just like everyone else gets treated a certain way and gets pushed very hard. And then to your point, um, you get a press release Sunday before.
Yes, you know what, Josh, that's a great point because you know what, I kind of like skated right over that. So people are probably hearing this and wondering, oh, hang on a second. Why is the Score 1260 having people sell when there's 3 other radio stations and some of those people on the other radio stations don't have to sell? Now, that's Cumulus Media Syracuse. I don't want to get too deep into why they have that happen, but look, this information is public, so I can say this. The Score did not rate as well as the other stations. Like 93Q is a beast. Like 93Q is one of the
Yeah.
biggest stations. There have been times 95X has been the number 1 station around. Like their ratings are through the roof. The Rebel had a legend in Dave Frasina at that point. Like those guys had established stuff. The Score had done well, but look, at this time, like AM radio is a little different. You just heard it was about a year and a half of transition. It wasn't rating as well, and the rights for Syracuse football and basketball are not on the Score, which is, everyone knows that's the king. The Syracuse Chiefs are, as Josh mentioned earlier. So if people are wondering, like, why are certain hosts being treated differently than others, ratings and revenue, like that's it. I think, right? I didn't give away anything. I think that's public knowledge
No.
that those stations are
Yeah.
monsters in Syracuse. So
For
here we
sure.
go.
And it's fair. It's just obviously when you're not a part of at least to upper management, what the ratings and the money is, that's it's kind of tough to deal with, as you were saying with the press release Sunday night or whatever it was.
But even with that, like I'm in sales, but I'm happy because, oh my God, I'm getting my own show. I got a press release Sunday night. I'm a little ticked, but I'm getting my own show. Like whatever your dream job is, like it's coming. It's going to happen. This has never happened before. I like even thinking back on this, I feel so grateful and so thankful that like, yeah, I busted my tail and I made it happen. But people wait years for this. I waited like 9 months. Like that doesn't happen. And you're along for the ride with me. Now, I got it. Like Gaz gets his dream job, it happens. but there's a lot more to this story. The history of the first quarter. What happens when two guys in their 20s get given the AM drive in their hometown markets? What happens with athletes, coaches, and more? And why did I leave Syracuse? That's coming up next. The history of the first quarter. More Josh Murray, the next episode of Getting There with Guys.